All right. Welcome back to the Portfolio Kings podcast / live stream. This week we are breaking down the NFC in a type of round robin where each capper is going to basically choose a team from a division, each division, 4 divisions. Do about 2 minutes breaking down that team that they've kind of done a deep dive, recap, looking ahead to the rest of the season. And then the other cappers are basically going to provide feedback to that kind of handicap. And we'll go through each division. So 3 teams, each division in the NFC. We did this last week. If you're able to catch it, some great nuggets of gold from Ron, Ace Sports is with us, and also Josiah with Sharp Clark NFL. So had some great insights last week. I think it honestly helped me have I think it was my best week last week. Yeah, the last 2 weeks were my best weeks of the season personally. So I think that really helped me personally with these guys. So hopefully we can do the same thing this week with the NFC, see if we can find any nuggets of gold. And with that, we'll start with Ron. We're going to kick off with the NFC East. And Ron's going to do the Giants and do his 2-minute breakdown, and we'll kick it off from there.
Thanks a lot. Good to be back. And you'll see a common theme in the teams that I'm going to be talking about today in the NFC. These are flawed teams that have a chance to be really good down the road. So naturally, I'm starting with the New York Giants, who have found a way once again to start the season on a dismal note. They start 0-3. They haven't been better than 2-6 in most of the last 6 or 7 years. They're sitting at 3-6 now, having just won their last game. But if you break it down a little bit closer, you'll actually find that there's some value in the New York Giants, and they're playing better ball right now. Their sack ratio is flat. They've had a big turnaround in terms of how they're stopping the run. In fact, less than 3 yards per carry allowed in the last 3 games. They've only allowed 39 points in their last 3 games. So if you take the season as a whole so far, you're going to say, oh, it's the Giants. They're terrible. But if you take what's going on right now, I think you'll find that this team, especially in the division that they play in, has a chance to make a little bit of noise, probably too late to catch Dallas in the long picture. But really, moving forward, and that's what we're doing, we're showing a snapshot of where they are now and what we think moving forward. They've got 5 games left in the division, so they can make some noise there. They do have to play Tampa and the Chargers, so they probably have too much ground to make up. But the biggest things that they have moving forward is this. They're still evaluating their quarterback, Jones. Is he the quarterback of the future, or will they need to draft a quarterback next year? They're still evaluating their head coach. Do they need to keep Joe Judge, or is he going to falter against similar or maybe a little bit inferior competition moving forward and find out that maybe this isn't right? And a really critical step is whether or not they keep their general manager, Dave Gettleman, because they're armed with 2 number 1 picks in this coming draft, and I believe the next draft as well, but at least in the 2022 draft, a very deep draft. And so there's a lot of positives moving forward. That's how I see the New York Giants, and I think they'll be competitive the rest of the year.
Interesting. Josiah, any follow-up thoughts with what Ron's presentation of Giants?
And not just 2 first-round picks, but right now, their first-round pick looks like it'll be early, and I think the other one is the Bears, which also might be an early pick. So that's some good stuff to build on. And I agree. I think one thing holding them back is their offensive coordinator, Jason Garrett. He's just not been able to implement an offense that attacks defenses where it needs to be attacked. It's slow moving. It's predictable. The runs are very easy to diagnose, and I think it's holding their potential back. And I think Daniel Jones has the ability to be a good quarterback in the NFL, but he needs a better coordinator.
Yeah, I've been very bearish on Daniel Jones, I think, the last couple of years. And I think it might be a situation where he doesn't have the support that a Josh Allen has. And so I think whether it's a huge regime change, moving on to Josiah's point, the OC, or Gettleman obviously is probably a good time for him to move on. I don't think this QB class coming up, from what I've heard and read a little bit about, is going to be necessarily a great opportunity to even get a new quarterback. So Daniel Jones, he's seen I think we've seen some growth from him as a leader, as a poised passer at times, and that's with really not having a lot of offensive minded support to really kind of take advantage and kind of raise his game. So I think to your guys' point, that's going to be the big inflection point for moving into next season. But for the rest of the season, I agree. From the Giants have been better than I think that the market really thinks, and so down this stretch, I think they've found somewhat of an identity. As long as they don't have all these cluster injuries game to game, I think they're definitely a viable team to be on for sure.
So my final point on this is good call on Jason Garrett. He's a recycled coach. They need better. In these days you have to be more innovative. And if they can get Saquon Barkley actually healthy for a longer period of time, then you could see a little bit more balance, and they won't have to rely on finding a receiver. Also, health problems at wide receiver. But if they can be more balanced, they can have more time of possession, take some pressure off the offensive line to try to protect Daniel Jones.
Great. Josiah, you are up next. Take it away with your Cowboys love or not love.
That's the Super Bowl contender Dallas Cowboys team. I believe in this Cowboys team. They popped off the page in week 1 against the Bucs with an offensive scheme that, in contrast to what I just said about Jason Garrett, that directly attacked the Bucs' defensive weaknesses. And so I thought, maybe Kellen Moore has put some things together. Let's give it a few games. And he kept doing it. He kept designing effective game plans. Their offensive line has been playing extremely well. They've been running the ball and passing the ball effectively. Very balanced team. And while we're seeing teams like Kansas City and Buffalo struggle because they're one-dimensional passing teams and defenses are taking away those big pass plays and really getting them frustrated, I think the Cowboys are built a little differently, and they can succeed on the ground if you force them to run. But if you leave those lanes open downfield, they're going to hit those talented wide receivers, especially once they get Michael Gallup back. So I think the Cowboys are an offense that's built very strong. They did have a bit of a hiccup this past week against Denver, but part of that is Dak coming off injury and Tyron Smith is injured. Hopefully they can get him back. He's a huge part of that offensive line. But I think this offense is good enough. And on defense, they are a hyper-aggressive defense. They don't allow a high completion percentage, but they allow a high yards per attempt. They allow a lot of yards after the catch, but they create a lot of turnovers. So this is we're going to attack the quarterback, force him to make mistakes, and just try to, get the ball back and force, maybe a sack on 3rd down or a turnover. But the flip side of that is a really talented quarterback can capitalize against those defensive weaknesses. And so I think the big question is, well, is their defensive performance sustainable? And the answer is yes, it is sustainable, but it's also exploitable. And so I think they're going to run into a little bit of trouble against the league's best quarterbacks. The way Tom Brady beat them in week 1, it really wasn't that difficult for him. Of course, when they're playing quarterbacks like Sam Darnold, they're going to be just fine. But I think in the playoffs, they're really going to be tested. However, I think their offense is strong enough to compete against any team in the NFC, and I think they're a legitimate Super Bowl contender.
Ron, any follow-up?
Well, that offense is, if not top 3, at least top 5. And what makes it strong is that it has elite run-pass balance, like you mentioned. In order to beat them, you have to take away one aspect of their game. Now, some teams can do that, but most of the teams they play, especially in their division, they can't do that at all. So there's really no chance of that. Going into the season, and from people I've spoken to, all that was asked of Dallas to win that division was to have a mediocre defense. And that's pretty much what they have in the 16 to 20 range is where I have them defensively. And that's certainly good enough to win the East. So there's really nothing more to add other than the fact that they're probably not ready to make a deep run in the playoffs, but they would be scary in the playoffs for any team that just doesn't have a top-tier defense. They're going to score on them.
Yeah, and to add to that, from a kind of big picture playoff run perspective, this team reminds me of, I believe it's the 2018 Chiefs to a degree, where the offense was really spectacular and the defense was not good. But the defense became aggressive the next year when they won the Super Bowl. So I think they might be closer to that kind of 2018-19 Chiefs range of team. As far as from the NFC side of conference, I don't think they're as good as that Chiefs team per se. But to your guys' point, that balance, getting enough out of that defense to get turnovers, make big plays, Dak playing well if he's healthy, and obviously all the weapons and offensive line. Yeah, it's definitely a team that the longer this season goes on, the more bullish I become about them, even despite the Broncos loss, which to me was a situational, both teams timing wise, is kind of where that kind of dud, I think, took place. But yeah, great stuff on the Cowboys. Next up is the Eagles. So for me, coming into this season, there was a lot of Eagles market narrative that they were going to be bad, and they're not great. Obviously, they're 3-6. They have a couple games that they were getting blown out, but they came back. They're competitive. They came back, pulled out that win versus the Panthers. What I've seen from the Eagles is they were on a trajectory to be better than the entire market thought, defensively, especially leading the way. But then Brandon Graham got hurt, and as the leader of the defense, I think that took the wind out of an already kind of soft defense. When best player with like maybe an average defense goes down, like now you're bottom 10 potentially, and things are going to get worse. But I think where this team has seen success is what the market thought was going to be Jalen Hurts not being a good quarterback. I think we all know he's not good at throwing the ball at a high rate of completion percentage. He's bottom 5 in the NFL, but Cam Newton wasn't good at that. Other quarterbacks we've seen to the downside, Tim Tebow was terrible at that. It doesn't mean these quarterbacks cannot win football games. It doesn't mean that they cannot have poise and have conviction in the abilities that they do have. And that was always kind of my bullish narrative on the Eagles coming into the season was Jalen Hurts is going to make generally good decisions based on his skill set and give his team a chance in key spots. And I think we've seen that most of the time. The team obviously doesn't have as much talent as other teams in the NFL, but going down the stretch, I think they've been highly penalized. New coach, young players. If that gets mitigated, they are competitive. They're finding kind of like a rhythm of how they can play and should play. It's really just going to come down, I think, to matchup dependency week to week. But as far as the whole Jalen Hurts can't be an NFL quarterback, it's all about what you build around him. So the Eagles don't necessarily have the best pieces around him, but it's also not god awful. So I think they're a little better than people give them credit for. And down the stretch, they play the NFC East, all play each other down the stretch. I wouldn't be surprised if they pull out a couple of those wins in very competitive games. So, yeah, just kind of my case. And I think they could get to 6 to 8 wins depending on those NFC East battles. But yeah, that's my take for now.
There are, at last count, 32 teams in the NFL. I think I have a good handle on 31 of them. And then there's the Eagles. I don't even know if they know what they're doing. Yeah. 1 week they run 6 times a game. The next week their leading runner runs once in the first half in a competitive game, and then a few times when it's not competitive in the second half. They're watering, they're fertilizing. I don't know what they're doing exactly. But lately they've had a little bit, maybe the coach is getting acclimated a little more. They're showing a little bit more run pass balance. I think I better stick to the stat sheet when talking about them because I'm still trying to get a handle on what they are. What they are is they have the worst pass defense percentage in the NFL. And that means you're always going to have the opportunity for a come from ahead loss. And you can see what happened last week with the Chargers. They ran out the clock on them because they don't have the ability right now, Philadelphia in the secondary, to close anybody out. They're also 0-4 at home. Not that home field advantage is that exciting this year, but 0-4 is still 0-4. And that's a problem. If you can't establish a winning record at home, you're not going to make the playoffs. There's room for improvement. I think the team is growing all the way through. especially at the end of this year. Again, that particular division, the one that we're forecasting on right now, we're talking about all their games, all their divisional games are at the end of the year. And they also play the Jets. So they have 6 winnable games later on, or at least, you'd say at least 4 or 5. The other thing they have is, which is crazy, is a bright future. Because if Wentz continues to start at quarterback for Indianapolis, they're going to have 3 number 1 picks next year. And a couple of them are very early on. So whatever they do this year, it's another team that's building for next year and the years thereafter.
Yeah, I'm with Ron. I can't figure out this team. And again, with the draft picks, I believe one of those draft picks is Miami's pick, which is going to be potentially top 5 pick. And so another team that's building for the future, although I'm not totally sure about this coach, I can't figure out if he knows what he's doing. Yeah. Sometimes I'm baffled by the game plan, and sometimes it looks really smart. And so I think he's figuring things out. He's a young coach, and I'm not sure if they're going to give him, a couple more years, or if they view him as just kind of an interim guy. I think he's got a lot to prove in the rest of the season. But this is a team that I'm looking. I stay away from, because I am having a hard time figuring out, what makes them tick.
Yeah, that's fair, and that's where I kind of put the emphasis on Jalen Hurts. Is I think finding the spots where you think he can lead this team in a competitive matchup is where the Eagles can be bettable, because to your guys' very good points, much of the team top down from coaching is unpredictable at this point with too much variance. So that's just kind of if you're going to bet them, look for spots where you think Jalen Hurts is going to take advantage with his legs and kind of open it up downfield for sure. Okay, that's the NFC East. Let's move on to the NFC North. So Ron's going to do the lovable losers, the Detroit Lions. Take us away, Ron.
I have to do the Lions. I think I know more Lions fans than any other fan base. I interact with them on a regular basis. So hi to all you Detroit Lion fans. This is not going to be all gloom and doom. Don't worry, you don't have Matt Patricia anymore. The new staff inherited a roster that was slow, built to run and stop the run. Their most stocked position was running back, which doesn't work in today's NFL unless you have Derrick Henry, and even Tennessee doesn't have Derrick Henry anymore. And the team started off with a wide receiver group that no NFL team should have. Ohio State and other college teams would run circles around the NFL group that they have. In fact, they just signed Josh Reynolds about 4 hours ago from this taping, and he's their best wide receiver now. So that's a problem that they have to address in the future. But sticking back to this year's team, yes, they're 0-8, and we figured out that Jared Goff is a placeholder quarterback. Basically, what this regime was signed on to do with long-term contracts was build for the future. And so skipping where they are now, let's just get to where they're going to be in 2023. And I will make a bold prediction that hopefully none of my co-stars here are going to hold me to, but the Detroit Lions will win the division in 2023. And here's why. There's no Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay. They haven't drafted worth a dime the last 2 years. Chicago has Fields, but they have a GM that hasn't drafted at all well, and he won't even have any first-round picks because of the Fields deal. So how are they going to build around him? How are they going to keep him protected? And Minnesota's not going to have Kirk Cousins. His contract is too prohibitive. They don't have a secondary. Mike Zimmer's reign is probably coming to an end. He's a good coach, but he probably needs a fresh start. And here's Detroit armed with a whole bunch of draft picks, a whole new regime, and a chance to just leapfrog everybody else. So rather than assess how competitive they're going to be the rest of the year, because probably 3 wins would be the ceiling, let's just hope that they assess the talent that they have right now, who's ready to go to war with them, so to speak, in 2022 and 2023, build a foundation for a team that can make noise in the future. And maybe Goff lasts another year, maybe not, while they build on another quarterback. And that's where I see them. Not competitive this year, but competitive in a very short time span.
I'll leave the 2023 prediction to you. I have no opinion on that. But for the rest of the year, I want to talk about how the Lions are the prototypical backdoor team, or at least they were coming into the year. Nailing a backdoor cover is not just a fluky event. You have to think about how the team is built. And what the Lions are built for is they've got a quarterback who performs much better when he's not under pressure. And you've got a run game that behind a strong offensive line that's going to keep them moving the chains and give Goff the protection he needs when the coverage is soft. And you've got a team that plays hard and continues to try to put points on the board even when the game is no longer in the balance. And that's exactly what the Lions were, at least coming into the season. And so that's why they've been such a great, backdoor cover team when they have a big spread. But their offensive line has been banged up a little bit. I think they're getting healthy, so that's something to watch. But these are the elements that I'm looking for, and so I look to back the Lions when they get a big enough spread because of that kind of team makeup.
I like that a lot. That's a great way to look at it. And that's something we talked about, I think, on the Lions preview coming in too. Is to your point, Josiah, is the assumption that though they have the worst wide receiver group maybe we've seen in a long time, and really have some big holes in this team, they do have veterans, they do have players, they do have excited coaches and schemes, honestly. So, having a plus 15 spread every week, more or less, not every week, this team was going to be in position to capitalize. And I think moving forward, similarly, especially now that they got off the bye, I think we started to see them kind of lose momentum of that motivation, but we'll probably get that captured back through the rest of the season in big spurts, just because the team, no one wants to lose, just point blank. They do want to win. They're human, they're players, and I think those backdoor covers are still going to be live for much of the rest of the season. So,
yeah, I think they will play hard. I agree with that completely. Obviously, they don't have the talent. Their sack ratio, one of the early indicators of whether or not they can get to opposing quarterbacks, which they can't, and whether or not they could protect Goff, and they can't do that. And Goff, like you said, not very good under pressure. And I agree. That's a good point about backdoor covering, because when the sack pressure goes away in these fourth quarter, maybe you bet them in the second half. You probably have been successful already. The problem is their roster needs a lot of retooling, and basically they have to rebuild the roster to win in the NFL, in today's NFL. And right now that roster isn't there. So they're relying on the good graces of others to ignore them in order to catch a win here or there.
Awesome. I agree with that. And so next up, we got Chicago with Josiah.
So if you look back, if you look back at my Twitter feed, you'll see that I was not the biggest fan of Justin Fields coming into this year. I had no opinion prior to preseason, but he looked really, really bad in the preseason action that I saw. And so I was very low on him and his production. And early in the season, I have been fading him and making money betting against him, which has been great. But what I saw against San Francisco was things started to click for him. There's a processing speed that rookies don't have when they enter the NFL. And combined with some of his poor mechanics, it was a real problem early on. Against San Francisco, some of that started to click. He started to identify when he needs to roll out of the pocket. And he's such a good quarterback outside the pocket. And then we saw that again against Pittsburgh in spurts, against a very good defense. And so I think that my days of just blindly fading Justin Fields are over. And now I'm looking more so to back the Bears, who are now underrated because everyone was so disappointed in how bad Fields has been so far. And in addition to that, you've got a defensive line that's been injured. So whenever Akeem Hicks and Khalil Mack are both on the field at the same time, I think this defense is going to be good again, especially against the run. And so you've got another good backdoor team, because when opposing teams have a lead, they're going to try to run the ball and they won't be successful. That will give Fields more opportunities late in the game when things are kind of off script and he's able to just wheel and deal and throw downfield. And I think as long as he can avoid the crucial mistakes, I think the Bears are going to be a good team to back down the stretch. Now, of course, they have a really difficult schedule. So it's going to be backing them a lot as an underdog, which is uncomfortable, but I think it's the right time to take Chicago. And then what we're going to see next year is hopefully some more development with these young players. And they're going to have a really bad record coming out of this season, mostly because of the strength of their schedule and how long it took them to get to where they are. So they might be a team to kind of back early next year, depending on how the offseason goes.
Interesting. Ron?
I produced 42 draft reports. And my opinion of Fields was that he had upside, but he needed to go to a team like all rookie quarterbacks that could protect him. The team itself has taken 33 sacks, worst in the NFL. So he's running for his life because he's not ready to make that second read and that third read. But what we're going to see from Justin Fields the rest of the year happened in the Pittsburgh game. You're going to see him look lost out there and make a lot of bad throws. And then you're going to see him throw a bomb, a perfect pass that gets the team right back in the game, because we all know that he has a live arm. So one thing I looked at, which is a little different than what you said, is that the last 4 games of the year have a chance to be against non-playoff teams. And that's where he could make strides. And that's all you're really asking of Justin Fields and the team, is to make some strides at the end of the year, because this team could flirt with 8 wins if all goes well. Their defense is fairly good, but they don't have any draft picks coming up. So what you see is what you get. So they're going to have to develop that offensive line.
Yeah, honestly, I agree with your guys' take. I don't think I have much to add other than when the Matt Nagy ship is going to sail officially. I think it'd be hard to see him being retained into next year, even if the Bears somehow squeaked into the playoffs with a late run. It just seems like, honestly, when Matt Nagy didn't, the timeline of when Justin Fields started to find some clicking, doesn't it correspond to when Matt Nagy was on the sideline? Like he had COVID and was out. I think it's in that realm, potentially. Not saying that's the reason, but it could be that for whatever reason, just Nagy's influence over this team, over, whether it's his persona, whatever that is, maybe he's just not a good fit for building up young quarterbacks, which Mitch Trubisky obviously did not work out either. So, that's just kind of my macro view on the Bears moving forward into next season, I think.
My closing statement is basically the offensive line is a problem, and that's going to limit this team's upside. But Fields is the type of quarterback who's at least equipped to handle a poor offensive line, because he can get out of the pocket, he can get moving, he can create time for his receivers to get separation. He can create 4 to 5 second plays, and cornerbacks just don't have the ability to stick on a receiver for that long, especially guys like Darnell Mooney and Allen Robinson. So I think he's equipped to handle a bad offensive line better than Andy Dalton would be, for example.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. Next up, we have the Minnesota Vikings. What a disappointing 3-5 team. Ron kind of touched on this team. So I know I was fairly bullish on them coming into the season. And from a competitive standpoint, I think that's justified. I mean, they very easily could be 7-2, at least 500. I think would be fair, but they're not, and they're not because something's wrong. And I think if you remember back to the off season, in part due to COVID, but I think it's mostly because of Mike Zimmer and just wearing on the veterans in this team and organization. There was a lot of discontent, a lot of contention in the locker room in regards to how certain things were handled, obviously COVID and the vaccine. And I think that kind of carried through into the season. And I think week 1 demonstrated that. I mean, the team that was mostly a complete mess to open a game was the Vikings. And then it's inexcusable for a team that's had this kind of veteran leadership and coaching staff to have 3 false starts in the first drive. Just that level of just not being ready. And then they came back, showed their talent better than the Bengals. It didn't matter. They still squandered the game. And we've seen that literally time and time again. They've had one good week against Seattle where they put the whole game together. Beyond that, they can't put 2 halves together. And to me, it's in part because of that macro coach organization down that I think it's just not working. It's something toxic in the water, and they need a change of scenery, so to speak. But that aside, moving on to the rest of the season, they play a lot of their division. They play the Bears twice, Lions, and I think Packers twice, and they have a couple winnable games. So this team, if they just can find some consistency, they get pressure on the quarterback very well. Obviously, like Ron said, their secondary is not their strength on defense by any stretch. The offense has struggled schematically with the new play caller, but they have pieces, they have the talent, they have the leadership, and they have the coaching experience to take advantage of a weak division, especially with Rodgers' situation and if Green Bay kind of falters a little bit down the stretch. So I'm not writing off the Vikings entirely. And because they're so competitive that there is a world where the variance just starts to go their way. And so there's basically some outs with the Vikings down the stretch that even though I think they need a big change in the offseason, for the rest of this season, I think they're live to go on a run and to make the playoffs and maybe even to get an upset in the playoffs, because I think they have the core tenets to do that. But if they lose to the Bears, if they lose to the Lions, if they lose twice to the Green Bay Packers, this could be a 5-6 win team and they blow it all up. So it's a range of variants that could come together. But I lean towards they pull it together and the variance starts to kind of favor them throughout a full four-quarter game. And that's kind of my takeaway the rest of the season for now.
I'm going to play off what you just said and lean the other way, because all the points, basically 6 of their first 8 games have gone down to the wire or they went to overtime. So the margin for error is so razor thin with them. They have to do everything right. And it's a competitive second half of the schedule, so they could get there. But I think they're going to fall just short. There's some hidden stuff in there that I think people should realize is that you have on paper a fantastic 27-10 sack ratio, playing to the defensive line, what you were talking about. But then you have Hunter, the leading instigator of that. He's out for the year. Yeah. He's on IR. He's out for the year. So now he's not doubled. The next best guy is doubled. The sacks are going to go down. I think some of these hidden things are going to happen. Can you keep Delvin Cook, completely healthy? History says not really. I think they're going to fall just short, and it's going to be disappointing because they have a high percentage quarterback and enough pieces in place to make a playoff run. But something's missing for me, and I think there's going to be stat regression.
Yeah, that's fair. Josiah.
I'll go a step further, and I'll write them off for the year. I think, a team like Minnesota had such a brutal schedule. They are, like you said, they're a razor thin margin team. Every week, it seems like they pop up with a 2.5 point spread one way or the other. And things just have not gone their way so far. And in addition to that, Danielle Hunter is out for the year. Michael Pierce has been banged up. Patrick Peterson's on IR. And now Harrison Smith is also done for the year. Their defense has been playing well. They've been getting pressure and sacks, like you said. But they've lost 4 of their best defenders, outside of maybe Barr and Kendricks, their 4 best defenders. And so I just don't see a team that has had so much variance go against them and then get worse through injury and then also have a schedule that's getting tougher. I don't see them turning it around. They don't have the energy. They don't have the coaching. They don't have what it takes. I think this is a season that has gone south for the Vikings, and I'm writing them off.
Yeah, I think you guys bring up some very good points from a win-loss ratio. I think I agree with you that the toxicity of this season and how it's unfolded for them is one of those seasons where a good team has a very disappointing season. And by good, I mean around average or so. So yeah, I agree with that. I think for me, it's more so the ability to be competitive down the stretch. So when and if there's opportunities to take the team, when when the market's kind of off them. I think that's when the Vikings are live, especially. So that's all I would look for me personally, if you're going to be on them. But I think that's good on that. Let's move on to the NFC South. We're going to go to Ron and the Carolina Panthers with the best quarterback in the NFL, Sam Darnold.
This is a complicated team, and Sam Darnold makes it complicated. It's easy to second guess and say they should never have taken Sam Darnold. They should have taken Justin Fields, or they should have taken Mac Jones or any of those other quarterbacks. But I disagree completely. Just like Cleveland, just like a couple of other teams, Carolina Panthers are not ready to take on a rookie quarterback. And so I thought the trade for Darnold, which involved no first-round picks whatsoever, was a very worthwhile try to get a veteran quarterback who needed a change of scenery from the Jets, who had zero offensive line, and try him out here. And lo and behold, they start 3-0, and then Christian McCaffrey goes down, and that's his safety valve. And then Darnold became the Darnold you never want to see, and Darnold became the guy that now needs to be replaced. Not with PJ Walker down the road, because I've studied him through drafts, and he's not the answer. So here we go with my one season win total over, which is Carolina over 7 wins, because there's a variety of reasons why you should always bet unders. And I'm very happy with my 7 under plays. But, the under 7 win is in deep peril, shall we say. But it looked good after 3-0. But the thing of it is, Matt Rule is a program builder. We've seen it in college at 2 different stops, and we're seeing it in the NFL. I'm going to take some numbers and read off some numbers to you, and it's kind of subtle differences. But the 2020 defense couldn't stop anybody via points allowed. They had basically only 28 sacks for the whole year in 16 games. Teams were running nearly 5 yards a carry against them. And all this happened when they had a plus turnover ratio. So far, halfway through this season, their point D is better despite Darnold coughing up the ball too many times, pick sixes, bad decision-making. Despite the negative turnovers, they have 22 defensive sacks, only 6 off their pace from last year, and they have a slightly improved pass deep percentage. So we're seeing some incremental positive vibes going on with Carolina's defense. And next up is the offense. And they're going to need a quarterback. They could use Darnold for another year, maybe not. They're going to need to rebuild that offensive line or continue to build that offensive line. They have the wide receivers in place. I think if you're a Carolina fan, you just need to be patient. It's not going to turn with Darnold out 4 to 6 weeks and PJ Walker pretty much not an NFL quarterback from everything I've studied. It's going to take a major effort to stay competitive in games and hope to squeeze out a few. And you're probably looking at 7 as a ceiling. But if they can come up with that, like Pittsburgh drafted this tight end who catches everything this year, and Atlanta drafted Pitts, obviously very, very high. If Carolina gets one of those big weapons for the next quarterback, I think this team is on the right track, but don't expect miracles the second half of the year.
Yeah, I've been extremely impressed with their defense. I think they're one of the top defenses in the league. Brian Burns is playing out of his mind. The entire defensive front, the edges are getting pressure consistently. They're stopping the run. And that is the type of defense that is going to be a difference maker if they had an offense that could hold up their end of the bargain. They kind of remind me of, I don't know, maybe the Broncos last year, where their defense was actually playing fairly well, but you wouldn't have known it at the end of the year because the offense had way too many turnovers and put their defense in too many bad spots. And I think that's what we might be facing with this Panthers team down the stretch. So the question is, can the defense keep them competitive, and can PJ Walker and Darnold, when he comes back, do enough with the offense and hopefully a healthy McCaffrey to put their defense in better positions? And if they do that, then I think they can. I think your over bet is still live, but it's down.
Yeah. Hedge out of it if you can. I think great points, guys. And I think PJ Walker might be a short-term lift for this team offensively. Obviously more for the legs benefit than Sam Darnold. But also just from I think this defense and this team is starting to waver on knowing they're not good. Like they know they're not going to get to 8 wins type mentality with Darnold as the quarterback. So when he's in, I wouldn't be careful. I would be careful backing the Panthers, to be honest, unless Christian McCaffrey is going to be live and playing at a top level. If McCaffrey is not playing and it's Darnold, I think we've seen to this point, Panthers are almost unbettable. It's just you cannot trust what he's been putting out in the field right now. Whereas if it's PJ Walker, I think that could be a short boost, kind of like the Josh Johnsons of the world when they come in, unsuspecting. Teams don't really know what they're prepping for exactly. So just something to consider down the stretch. Next up.
Oh, let me make a.
Sorry. Yeah, Ron, finish your point on that. Yeah.
2 points. One to that. Unfortunately, they're in the division with Tampa and New Orleans, and they don't have the luxury of playing bad defenses for PJ Walker. And the other thing, there was a point made earlier about the quarterback class. One of you made the point that it's not a great quarterback class, but what makes it great is that there are 7 or 8 people that could be developed, and maybe the NFL will learn not to reach for a quarterback because next year is not the year to reach for a quarterback. Carolina can get their quarterback. There's literally 7 to 8 to 10 quarterbacks that could be viable quarterbacks in the NFL once developed. None of them are top 10 picks. So Carolina doesn't even have to use their first round pick on a quarterback next year, but they have to plan for the future. The offense needs to be addressed.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Ron. Next up, New Orleans with Josiah.
I am extremely bullish on the New Orleans Saints right now. Their defense, first of all, is what powers them. I think it's an elite defense. They came into the year, they shut down Aaron Rodgers, and then they suffered some serious defensive line injuries. And unlike last year's Saints defense, they're not deep. And so those injuries really hurt them. And I think they struggled through a few games. They're now fully healthy. Same thing happened on offense. Their offensive line got hurt. They're an offense built around winning the offensive line battle, picking up a lot of yards on the ground, and playing conservatively in the pass game until you have that opportunity for the deep ball, setting up by a good ground game. They weren't able to do that because their offensive line was hurt. They didn't do it because Jameis Winston didn't know how to play that game. He wasn't using Kamara effectively. He wasn't running the offense the way that it's been run for years with Drew Brees. And I think with Trevor Siemian, they actually have a chance to be better than they were with Jameis Winston. And I think especially with Taysom Hill sprinkled in as kind of a gadget player, around the end zone, they put him in the Wildcat to, add an extra blocker to an already strong offensive line. They can really overpower teams in the red zone. I think they're going to have a high conversion percentage to score touchdowns. And I think their offensive line is going to give them a chance against every defense. And so I think this is a complete team on both sides of the ball. And the market may not be caught up to that because of, one, the up and down nature of the early part of their season, and 2, a lack of belief in Trevor Siemian. If you look at the box score of their game against Atlanta, Trevor Siemian didn't have that good of a game. But if you watch the actual film, you'll see how many perfect passes were dropped by receivers for key first down conversions. You'll see him responding to pressure correctly in all but one instance, and you'll see him throwing on the run to guys that were getting open. It was a quarterback that was seeing the field, and I think his experience in Denver and then some time off has really put him in a position where he can succeed when given the right offensive mentor, and that is Sean Payton. So I think this is a team that is poised for a playoff push in a season where I think most people have written them off.
Ron?
Yeah. Sean Payton, in the last 2 years, his team has gone 9-1 without Drew Brees as quarterback because he changes the game plan. He knows what to do. So this isn't unusual for him. I'm sad that Jameis Winston didn't play the whole year because once they took the wraps off of him, I wanted to see what he could do with this offense. It doesn't have the same wide receivers like they used to, but I'm sad we're not going to see that. For anybody who wants a handicapping tip for the Saints, the ship may have sailed, but the first 3 rules of betting Saint games are look dog, and look dog. And we're 7-8 to the dog so far with Saints games, so might as well stick with it.
Yeah, and to add to that, to Josiah's point about Trevor Siemian and this offense is, you know, the QB battle to start the season was between Taysom Hill and Jameis Winston. So why is Trevor Siemian the starter now? I think that's a clear indication that if you trust that Sean Payton is more of an expert than whoever's on Twitter today, that Trevor Siemian has the goods that is better than Taysom Hill at quarterback for his system. And putting Taysom Hill where he flourishes, to Josiah's point, may actually prove to be better for Sean Payton's style offense for this season, the rest of the way that the market may take a few weeks to catch up to, if take all season, because Trevor Siemian is not a sexy name. I think a lot of people may not even remember that he was a starter for a little while in Denver. So yeah, I like that point a lot, Josiah.
Yeah, and so far all he's done is come into the game and beat Tampa Bay, which granted the defense played a massive role in that. I recognize that, but he did beat Tampa Bay. And then against Atlanta, he came back from 24-3 or something with a game-changing drive at the end of the game. They scored, and then Atlanta had a 60-yard bomb to Cordero Patterson for the game-winning field goal. He did not lose that game. Matt Ryan and the Falcons won that game against them. So I've been impressed with the small sample size so far.
Yeah, awesome. Good stuff. Next up, Tampa Bay, a team that I had a lot of success with last year. This year, not as much. But coming into the season, the Bucs are the favorite with KC to win the Super Bowl. Now it's the Bucs. I think the numbers they're plus 580 to win the Super Bowl. Their road to getting to the Super Bowl is going to be tougher than I originally thought it was going to be, especially now that I think Dallas is, one, because they played each other and we saw it, but I think Dallas is in position to compete with them. But what we've seen from the first half of the season is the Bucs offense, when it's healthy, is one of the best, if not the best, in the NFL. And it's going to be hard to stop for anybody. I think only teams like the Saints that have a formidable front that can really make Tom Brady's life uneasy, stop his first read potentially with Lattimore, is really your best shot at them, and get some variance with turnovers. So aggressive defenses like the Cowboys have more advantage to take down the Bucs in a playoff run than some other teams. But as far as the rest of the season goes, their schedule is very soft. They have one more game against the Saints, but they're going to be in position to get the 1 seed. And so that to me is the position of, if they get the 1 seed, it's really, I only see the Rams being a team that can take them down. I know the Cowboys can, but I think they're going to be in position to get to the NFC Championship game, and then it's going to be a coin flip from there. And then I think whoever pulls the NFC down, whether it's the Rams, Boys, Bucs, is probably going to win the Super Bowl. So could be the Bills. Bills could come around. It's tough to see the AFC pulling it out. But yeah, definitely down the stretch, getting back to the season, I think with that secondary getting it all healthy, they really can't be much worse than they've been to start the season. And the team's still 6-2. They're going to take care of business against most of the bad teams. They're probably going to get to 12, 13, 14 wins, be in position for the 1 seed. As far as covering, it really depends how healthy that secondary is. If you can't guard anybody, it's great for backdoor covers. It's great to stay competitive like the Eagles did. They came all the way back. So that's just something to kind of monitor on a week-to-week basis. But the long play, I'm very bullish on the Bucs to still be in position to at least get to the NFC Championship game, and then obviously it's kind of open-ended from there, is my macro take on them.
Okay, I think I'm going to try to offer a slightly contrarian point of view, even though I love this team. I love the chemistry. They brought everybody back and so on. But let's go back to last year. Their bye week was week 13. At the time of their bye week, they were 7-5, and nothing was really coming together. And it was Tom Brady's first year there, and it was COVID, and they didn't have practices and so on. They had the bye. They came back. They ran the table. And they not only ran the table, they did it mostly in impressive fashion. And here they are today, a very dominant team. And now they've just had their bye week. And that's my problem. Tom Brady's 44 years old. Tom Brady spoke out 3 days ago about how he hates that they bargained for a 17th game. Tom Brady's going to play 9 straight weeks. And hopefully they clinch the number 1 seed before that or something like that, because if they're not the number 1 seed, he's going to end up playing 13 straight weeks. And I don't think that's going to be a positive for Tampa Bay. They are possibly the best NFC team on paper, but I could see this crashing at the end of the year due to the fact that Tom Brady is now going to have to play a whole mess of games in a row. And even though he looks like Superman, I'm curious to see what happens in December and January.
Their secondary needs to get healthy and improve, because the best passing offenses in the league, which the Rams and the Cowboys are involved in that, are going to exploit that secondary. And it's going to be a major problem down the stretch. And the thing about their offense is it's a high variance offense. Brady throws a ton of deep balls, and he's good at it. And the receivers are great. And that's a good offense. But it's the type of offense that with just a little bit of disruption, maybe the defensive line gets pressure just a little bit quicker the way New Orleans did, and it can throw everything off. And what was a 45-yard pass is an incomplete pass. And all of a sudden your run game isn't great. And it's the type of thing that can become that's how a playoff upset happens. So I'm more skeptical than you, Zach, but I do think on paper they should be considered the favorites. I just think it's an even race.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I'm capping my bullish case into the NFC Championship game. I think they have this schedule down this stretch that's probably the least competitive of the Rams and Cowboys and the Cardinals to get that 1 seed. So it really hinges, I think, their success from a playoff run perspective is, can they get that 1 seed, get that time off to regroup, recalibrate, and kind of take care of business ultimately. Cool. So let's go to our final division, NFC West. We have Ron. He's going to take up on the Arizona Cardinals, a team that cannot lose, no matter who's quarterback or who's wide receiver or who's on defense.
Yeah.
They just keep winning.
Well, Colt McCoy is a great backup. He just doesn't have the body to be a starter. It's just too bad that he's in that body, because he's going to be a coach someday. Last week, we talked about the AFC, and I talked about how carefully built the Buffalo Bills were. This is the exact same thing with Arizona. Steve Keim, the GM, is so underrated in terms of building a team. He doesn't get any credit, but he's in such sync with Cliff Kingsbury. And Kingsbury knows offense. He could scheme anywhere. And all he asks for, he uses a different kind of running back. So he gets Kenyon Drake and then James Conner. And he doesn't need this, your traditional running back. He just needs somebody to spread the field and move around. And they get Hopkins for him. Then they go out and get A.J. Green. Then they tried with Andy Isabella, the guy from Massachusetts, which I thought was a good pickup at the time, but he didn't pan out. But they still wanted that piece. So they went out and got Rondale Moore and made that piece work. Then they traded for an offensive lineman, one of their weak areas, with the Raiders in order to get that guard Jackson. And then they get Zach Ertz from Philadelphia. And there's another weak area that's been improved. Coaching is a problem on the defensive side of the ball. So what do? You get on the field leaders so that your coaches are less important. You get J.J. Watt. Unfortunately, he got hurt. You get another guy. You draft Simmons in 2020. You draft another guy in 2021. This team is so carefully built that they're succeeding in a very rough division. It was hard to pick them beyond, higher than third coming into the year, despite all these unbelievable chemistry things that they took care of. And yet here they are, and they're that way because of the way they're being built. Now, can they continue this moving forward? That's a big question, because the stat sheet isn't perfect. When I look at this to prepare for this and to prepare for the second half of the season, I still see a flawed defensive stat sheet, other than the fact that they can get to opposing quarterbacks. which helps when you have quarterbacks that are younger in the league. But it's still going to be a problem against Matthew Stafford and against Russell Wilson and so on. December 13th is the big game. That's when they play the Rams. I believe they already beat the Rams. So if they beat them again, they're going to be that first seed. And I think that game is important for so many other reasons, because it's not just playing them on a Monday night, which means they have the short week the next week, but they have another short week after that because they're going to play on Christmas. So they're going to play on Monday night, then they're going to go 6 days, and they're going to go 6 days. So I think that game really holds the key, whether or not they're going to be a division winner or whether or not they're going to be a wild card entry.
I've been down on paper saying that they're not going to win the division. It's going to be the Rams. And I think the reason why I am down on the Cardinals is because they have a scary amount of talent. They're like, everything you laid out is accurate. The offensive playmakers is insane. Kyler Murray down the line. But there's things about this way this team is built that just concern me from a making a playoff run perspective or being strong down the stretch perspective. They fumble a ton of snaps. You know, it's little things. They get these weird offensive penalties consistently and put them in bad spots. Like, how many times have they had a 3rd and 20 and then Kyler Murray is like falling backwards, throwing it downfield somewhere, and just, the guy makes a play and it's a touchdown, and we're all like, yeah, it's Kyler Murray's amazing. That's, in my opinion, not a sustainable way to run an offense. And so I think what we're going to see, and we saw it against the Packers, in that final drive, we had a fumbled snap that cost them a timeout and some yards on a key drive. And then when they got down near the red zone and the end zone, they ran 3 straight running plays when the clock was running and they didn't have timeouts. And that just limited the amount of times they could throw into the end zone. And then when they did throw into the end zone, they weren't on the same page. And so I think those kinds of flaws are going to become fatal in spots like that. And it's going to happen in a big game, and their season's going to be done. So I'm fading them in terms of, long term.
Yeah, I think I agree with both your guys' kind of viewpoints in general. And to Josiah's point, down the stretch, Seattle's, Russell Wilson's coming back. He's getting healthier. I think they play San Francisco again, or did they already play them twice? I can't remember. But obviously they still play a tough division. So I could see this team going 500 down the stretch, and really kind of whiffing, especially with the injuries. I know Colt McCoy's capable as a backup, but it's not Kyler Murray. He can't make the types of plays down the field that Murray can do. So I think I agree with Josiah as far as the rest of the season is concerned. Is the Cardinals really cannot get any better. Just from the injuries and how they've been playing. They've peaked just from you can't get any higher than they've played. So we're definitely going to see some regression and pieces and in flashes. And I think that's enough to get them down to maybe even 500 down the stretch as far as the rest of the season goes. But yeah, that's my 2 cents.
So to close on them, even though I'm not entirely high on the coaching staff, based on what we're all saying, are we still underestimating them? Because it seems like the league's been underestimating Arizona for 1.5 years now. As a handicapper, I'll be watching the defensive stat sheet week after week. I'm not going to watch the offense. I know what it can do. But if I see regression in the defensive stat sheet, that's going to be a concern for me. If I see that the young guys are pulling it together, I'm going to let that drive me as a handicapper moving forward.
Very nice. Next up, we have Seattle with the star Geno Smith. Talk us through Seattle, Josiah.
I'll start with the positive. Their defense is trending up. They had some serious struggles to start the year, but they've played fairly consistently well since Geno Smith took over. Coincidentally, it's interesting how that sometimes happens with teams. The personnel hasn't really shifted, so it could just be that they've been working to get on the same page. But overall, I think this team is just not built to succeed in the long run. They have not threatened to win the Super Bowl since, I think it was 2016. And yet every year they're just good. They're good enough to make the playoffs. They've got Russell Wilson. They've got some great playmakers on the outside. but they just haven't threatened. It's not, like you look at the Packers and they'll get close, and then there's a crucial end game scenario in an NFC championship game, and they don't make the Super Bowl, and they pack it up and try again. They're close. You can feel it. They have what it takes. Seattle hasn't felt like it has what it takes in years, and I'm skeptical that Pete Carroll has the mindset to attack today's NFL. He seems a little bit retrogressive, and every time Russell Wilson starts to play well, he pulls back the reins. And we've seen it. We saw it last year. We saw it at the beginning of this year. So I think this is a, mediocre to below average team, mediocre to above average team in a really tough division. And I think for the first time in a while, they're going to miss the playoffs. And I think they're going to have some real soul searching to do in terms of, is this the coaching staff we want to continue with? Is this a team we want to continue with? Does Russell Wilson stay? I think this team has a lot going on under the surface, and it's not good. As far as the rest of the season goes, their offense has been predicated on making big plays happen. Russell Wilson throws one of the prettiest deep balls in the league, and he's got two of the best receivers at catching them. So that can work. The problem is when you lock that down, they don't really have anything else to go to. And until their defense started playing better, they were not a good team. Now they're kind of a little bit better. But I think people are going to overestimate the impact that Russell Wilson has. And so there might be some spots to fade Seattle once they get him fully acclimated.
This is another team I'd watch the defensive stat sheet to see how they progress second half of the year. They're off their bye. Last year, the second half season stats were unbelievably good for the defense. They turned it around completely. And you spoke about Pete Carroll. His flaws, he's not a great in-game coach. He's done some things with play calling that we've seen that hasn't been perfect. His best attribute is he is the best teacher of the game. He coaches these guys up. These draft picks, which are graded horribly before, in April and May, end up being starters because he just teaches them the fundamentals and he gets them to rise above their real talent level. But in-game decision-making, it can be costly. Now, you talked about Colt McCoy before, and you talked about Geno Smith. I'm just thinking, considering how close those two losses were, if Colt McCoy was in Seattle, would they have two more wins? Because Geno Smith was sacked 13 times in his 3 games. And that's, what does that, that translates to 65 in a 15 games and over 70 in a 17-game season. So, they may miss the boat. The schedule isn't that difficult the rest of the way through. But again, I'll be watching the stat sheet. It's like you said, it's kind of a thin line. They may be due for a free fall. But then again, with the 2 weeks that they've had, we may see some improvement as well. Tough to tell.
Yeah. I think I lean towards for the rest of the season. I think they're still going to miss the playoffs just because, to your guys' point, the difficulty of the division and schedule and pieces. But with Russell Wilson coming back and the defense potentially improving for both reasons you guys mentioned, I think this team is going to lean more towards what we've seen the last couple of years, which is during the regular season, they're a good team that can't win the Super Bowl. But I think we're going to get closer in that direction than kind of the Vikings narrative of kind of like the wheels kind of caving underneath them. So from comparing two different team situations that are struggling but better than where they're at, I think I trust, if Wilson's healthy, Seattle to be more competitive and to win more games than a Vikings team who has maybe more variance. So yeah, just from that perspective, I would lean more of there's spots definitely to back Seattle down the stretch. All right. Any final words, Josiah?
Yeah, their defensive numbers did trend up last year, but their schedule got so much easier. And so, they played the Eagles, the Giants, the Jets, Washington with Dwayne Haskins, the Rams with, I think it was whatever backup quarterback they had, and San Francisco. That was how they finished the season. So it's like, yes, they finished strong. And I think we're seeing a little bit here with their last 3 against Pittsburgh, New Orleans, and Jacksonville. It's a little bit of their defense can do well against bad offenses, but they haven't got the talent to compete against the best offenses. And so that's when I think is the right time to fade Seattle's, when their defense doesn't project to perform well, to your point, Ron.
Good point. Thank you.
Gotcha. Okay. Last but not least, the bold prediction Super Bowl champions, Los Angeles Rams. So I have a lot of futures on the Bucks, and not only this conversation, but just in general. I think you guys bring up some great points as to the issues the Bucks are going to face down the stretch, potentially. And I think the team that potentially is going to benefit the most from that is the Rams. To Ron's point about the Cowboys, I don't think the Cowboys are quite ready to take that next big final step. And the Cardinals, I think, are kind of, to Josiah's point, are going to falter down the stretch. I think Green Bay's a little bit an Aaron Rodgers head mess thing going on. So it's really going to be down to the Rams and Bucks, in my opinion. And the Rams showed they can beat the Bucks. This Rams team reminds me of the Bucks last year. New quarterback, getting situated. They basically took care of business against the bad teams. They beat the Bucks, and their 2 losses came against playoff caliber teams. That's basically exactly what happened with the Bucks last year. Is they're figuring things out. When you have, especially your quarterback, and the offense is still top 5, it's still good. The question is, how much better can it get? And I think with the synergies improving, especially after the bye and down the stretch of the season, and with the addition of Von Miller, even if just from a motivation standpoint of just kind of like thinking you have that extra element, if he's healthy, even better. I think this team, though they're thin beyond their top-heavy defense, is in position to take advantage of a playoff run and get to the Super Bowl. Then they're going to be as good as any team that they would face. So as we go down the stretch, I could see the Rams doing what the Bucks did and have this kind of, they start to dominate teams because they have not dominated teams in the first half of the season. And again, I think that's in part due to figuring out where does Stafford fit in with the offense, with the scheme. When can we yin? When can we yang? And I think the team's going to start to kind of figure that out as we go. The defense, I think, also will start to improve. The secondary has struggled a little bit in this first half of the season. But yeah, from a macro view on where this team is headed, obviously health is key. But I don't think there's any team in better position to take down the Super Bowl favorite and then capitalize and win a Super Bowl from there.
Okay. So we saw last week that Stafford had a bad day. So what? It's a 17-game season. There's a lot of wear and tear in the NFL, more than ever before. It's going to happen. So let's not hang our hat on that at all. I think you made a point about the big plays on defense. And the thing about the Rams is they're not really a shutdown defense in the way that the Saints are or the Tampa Bay Bucks can be in terms of just shutting down the run completely and so on. The Rams rely on their big stars to make big plays. And when that doesn't work, there's a lot of people that can complete a lot of passes against them. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, this comes down to that game against Arizona. It's going to be weird, but the Rams may be, or certainly are, one of the 3 best teams in the NFC. But if they lose that game against Arizona, therefore being 0-2 against Arizona, they're probably on the road, first week in the playoffs to play a powerful team, whether it be Dallas or Green Bay or the winner, or whoever else is there. Could be Tampa Bay, for example. But they're probably going to be on the road in that next game if they don't win on 12-13. I find that interesting.
My only NFC winner bet is on the Rams. The way I wanted to play them coming into the year was, if this team stays healthy, they're going to be the best team in the NFC. And they've stayed healthy for the most part. And I still feel that way. I feel like that's a great ticket to have. And I feel like it has a good chance of cashing if they stay healthy. But the thing is, they're so concentrated. We've seen Stafford get banged up in the past. If he gets hurt, we're back to square one. On the defense, Jalen Ramsey and Aaron Donald power that defense. They have some other players that are worth, they play well and they have good leadership. But without one of those 2 guys, I just don't see this defense being a Super Bowl caliber defense. And same thing with, Cooper Kupp. I don't think that they can rely on just Robert Woods and Van Jefferson. So there's a lot of guys that need to stay healthy because of the shallowness of their team at key positions. But as long as they stay healthy, I think they have what it takes to beat the Bucks, win the NFC, and go to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I think, I don't think I have any final points on the Rams. NFC, anything from, I know there's a big team we didn't touch on, the Packers. Did we have any final thoughts with, is this team at least viable to go on a Super Bowl run despite obviously the talent issues and pieces, and then the kind of Rodgers kind of contention with the organization?
I'll keep it short. Yes, because of the division they play in.
I'll keep it shorter. Yes, because of the quarterback. Actually, I'm gonna lie. I think they're trending up. They've been dealing with a ton of injuries, and they're getting those guys back. These are not season-ending injuries. So once they get Jair Alexander back, some of those other defensive pieces, they'll have a defense to complement what their offense is doing, which is outperforming its talent, which is incredible. But their offensive line has been playing way above its level, and Aaron Rodgers just has that ability to manipulate defenses that can come in handy in those key moments of playoff games.
Very good. Awesome. Well, thank you for tuning in. Thank you, Josiah. Thank you, Ron. Another strong episode of, recapping NFC this week and forwarding into the rest of the season. Check us out, and hope to see you next week, and we'll keep it going. Appreciate it, everybody.
Thanks,
Thanks.